Hello, this is Andrew Dudich with 980 WITY with Amy Rademaker, and you're with Carle Hospital for Farm Safety and Health. And tell us a little bit about what your department works on.
Our department works out of the Public Relations Department at Carle Hospital, and my goal and the work that I do is to go out and educate the general public about farm safety, focusing in rural areas and talking about farm safety with farm families, making sure EMTs and firefighters are trained for agricultural emergencies, and then making sure that our physicians and nurses at Carle Hospital are aware of different mechanisms of injury and things that they may be seeing coming as a level 1 trauma center when we accept those patients.
Farm safety is something that affects everybody, whether you live on a farm or not, because if we're out in a rural area, there's farm implements out there. As you mentioned, the doctors and nurses who might not be familiar with how a certain piece of equipment works. So you're able to then bring this kind of the forefront of everybody in the area, because if you're in this part of Illinois, you're going to be around farming.
Correct, and I always talk about our role at Carle. We're very urban here in Champaign-Urbana, but in 5 minutes we can be rural, and everybody's affected by agriculture if they leave Champaign-Urbana, whether it's getting stuck behind a tractor or stop because rail cars are going to be moving more and more this harvest, getting grain moving. We're all impacted by that. So we talk a lot with the general public about slow-moving vehicles and closure time, and making sure that our new drivers are aware of closure time, and but making sure people realize that agriculture is the most dangerous occupation in the U.S., but it's very necessary for us to eat and be clothed. So it's an important role, and we need to all work to keep our farmers safe.
A lot of the time, there's a lot of safety precautions we can take to make some of these accidents more avoidable. What are some of the main things people can do to take a little bit of extra time and be safe on the farm?
And you'll often hear me talk about farm incidents, because they are preventable. So many of our incidents that happen are preventable. Making sure that we have proper training, and if we're employing other people, do they have the proper training? Do they have the proper personal protective equipment? For example, during harvest, if we're out by the grain bins and it's really loud, are we wearing earplugs? Do we have a 2-strap dust mask? Trying to think about harvest and simple things that we can do to make it safer, but also getting plenty of rest. That's one thing I can't emphasize enough, is that our response time slows down when we get tired. And during harvest and planting, this always becomes much more of an issue, because they're working long hours. Take time, make sure we're getting out of the tractor and moving around, keeping ourselves awake and staying safe.
I think a big thing sometimes, and I know I'm guilty of this also, is getting complacent with things, saying, "Oh, I don't need a mask, I'll be fine. I've done this 1,000 times, it's fine." But that's when accidents can come about. And so sometimes I think we need to take that extra moment and pay attention to things that we might be very used to, but that can be a big danger.
Yes, and when we talk about health effects, a lot of the times they're not acute. So it might be we don't wear a respirator because we don't think about that it's necessary, or a mask. But then 30 years down the road, we have an issue, or hearing. I mean, that's a big one in agriculture, is loss of hearing. And I encourage people, I know my dad, he would say, "Well, I can't hear anyway. I don't need to wear hearing protection at this point." And I said, "But you need to make sure that your employees do, because we can prevent this." So making sure that they're aware of personal protective equipment is really important. But when we think about farm safety, there's a role for everyone.
There's a wide age spread of where different people have accidents. It affects people of all ages. There's some of the older people that can get hurt, but there's a lot of kids that are involved in farm accidents as well. And maybe starting with them is a good place to change generations and how they look at safety.
Right, and when we were talking about complacency, just some things to add with that is no one ever thinks it's going to happen to them until it does, or it happens to their neighbor. But we know statistically, for tractors, for example, 1 in 10 tractor operators will overturn a tractor in their lifetime. And so we have to be mindful that it can happen. And all the times that we do things that we probably shouldn't, and it turns out okay, that one time that it goes bad, it could be devastating. But we teach the kids a lot, and we like to get the youth involved, because we know that their behaviors at a younger age we can change and influence, and they haven't been involved maybe in agriculture. But I always say, as soon as you can walk, you have some role in the farm if you live on a farm. So we start pre-K and through the elementary grades, and we do stuff in high schools. But if we can really hone in on those K through 8th graders and try to influence their behavior, that's a good start for us. And they can influence then their parents and grandparents.
And these programs in safety expand well upon just having an agricultural operation. You might just live in the country and have a lot of land, but you still will have mowers, you have maybe ATVs out there. So it's not necessarily always having a tractor that's going to present a possible risk. There's lots of other things to worry about as well.
Right, and our programs, especially our Progressive Ag Safety Days, our topics cover areas that can be applied to a strictly farm operation or just living in a rural area. For example, a rollover protection structure. We see a lot of those now on zero-turn mowers. We talk about how easy it is for a tractor to overturn. It's the same thing with the application of a roll bar on one of those mowers and the importance of wearing a seat belt. We talk about ATV safety, and we know that a majority of incidents on ATVs statistically happen at play, not at work. So making sure that kids are wearing helmets. People are concerned about chemical exposure, and you can have that just by spraying your lawn. So we do talk about chemicals. Grain maybe obviously is more specific to just the farm, but a lot of our programs have application to farm kids and non-farm kids.
And since we live in this kind of area, you might have a lot of people visiting from in town that are friends maybe with someone on a farm. So this helps them to be aware also, because they're not used to how this equipment works and the possible risks, concerning those.
Correct. People are becoming farther and farther removed from the farm that once were. And our family, for example, our family farmed for years and years, and I'm still involved in agriculture, but I don't live on a farm. So when we go to visit the farm, making sure that our kids are aware of those risks, we have to think about that, because growing up, we were taught at an early age different risks. But for kids that haven't been around it, they get to a farm and it's very inquisitive. There's lots of things to climb on and play on and learn about, but we need to make sure that we're teaching a safety message to the people that come and visit our farm as well.
If there's one key point you want somebody to take away from this interview that can maybe help them, what is that?
Oh, there's so many things that I could emphasize, but I think what we need to remind people of, it can happen to anyone at any time, and we don't want people to become a statistic. We're out there educating to prevent these incidents from happening, but it takes a change in behavior and willing to accept that it could happen to you in order for us to truly make a difference. So we need people to accept that things can happen and be willing to take safety precautions to prevent it.
And even if it's not necessarily you, there's a lot of people around you. It could happen to your neighbor, it could happen to your spouse, your children, so it's good to try to be ready in case something happens and to make sure everyone's aware of the potential dangers.
Correct, and be an advocate. You can advocate for your spouse to change a behavior and really emphasize those things. We all need to be watching out for each other.
If somebody wants to contact you for more information or to see what kind of programs are in their area for a school or anything like that, how do they go about doing that?
They can reach us by visiting Carle/farm safety, or carle.org/farm safety, or they can also email farmsafety@carle.com.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Amy, for talking with me today. This has been Andrew Dudich for 980 WITY.